Hello everyone, I'm joined by TSM Head Coach Cap, and we're here to talk about everything Stage 4. But before we get into the weeds of the meta and the bracket and everything like that, I wondered if you could talk us through how you ended up with this roster for Stage 4, because this has seen quite dramatic changes compared to the TSM roster we've seen all year.
Yeah, well, the main thing, there was two considerations going in. Obviously, we needed, to qualify for Stockholm, we needed players that had a base amount of points that was high enough to put us within, punching distance of Nightmare and Citrus, who were kind of the Toronto's set. I think right now, they could literally never play another game again and they'd make it. NRG is basically unreachable. I think they're like 790 or 760 or something. So Nightmare with 550, Citrus with however much they have, 550 was what we needed. And so the plan that I made, we drew up a bunch of plans that could maybe work based on how high the team could maybe place and also where our starting point was. And this was the best team we think that had the combination of, we have the placement power. This team just needs to place one higher than Nightmare or Citrus, but also had exactly the amount of points we needed, was that 480 threshold. So that one placement higher, that 75-point boost, puts us in the qualifying spot in third. So that was really the main consideration. With the only extra thing being that there's a rule where your points are capped at what your old team's total was if you have 3 of your 5 core roster members. So unfortunately, we were limited to only being able to keep 2 of roster members from last stage, which... it's unfortunate I had to work out that way, but that was the considerations that we had.
And then if we focus on the players that have come in, so you've added Vision, Riker, Squid, and Lyre, what do they add to the team then in terms of in-game qualities, out-of-game qualities?
Well, we worked with Riker before. I mean, having him back is just basically fills his old slot on the team. Really flexible, main tank, good leader. Vision and Squid. They're a really good pairing, and obviously they've worked with King before too on Maryville, and they scrum on that team together and play collegiate together. So they already kind of have a lot of chemistry as a core to work around, especially because with a lot of the Genji being played right now, King gets a lot of play time. So a lot of that, it's basically just like having LG with different members in a couple of the slots, but they work well. And also, Squid and King have played with Riker and with Rocket before. And Lyre. Actually, this team is really similar to in the Flash Ops tournament. We basically had this same roster, but we had Chopper instead of Vision. But everyone's worked well together before. And Lyre coming in, he's a really experienced player. He also kind of brings TSM has always been a really, or WISP or whatever you want to say, it's been a really a kind of serious environment with the players feel like they have a lot to prove, and we work really hard. Sometimes it's detrimental, working too hard, overworking ourselves. But it's kind of nice to have some people who are kind of naturally a little bit more laid back and stop us from overworking ourselves. And so I think it's a nice environment. It's a nice blend.
And you talked about some of the roster moves sort of almost being forced so you could meet the right criteria to still give yourself a chance for Stockholm. When you look at this TSM roster compared to the various iterations you've had throughout the year, how would you rank it in terms of power level? Do you think this is on the stronger side, or?
I think it's definitely on the stronger side. It's hard for me to, because going into almost every stage, we've made decisions and then there has been a large patch that has hit us, right before the tournament, or, in EWC was literally the day before our match or a day and a half before our match, so I do think every version has been strong, but this version is very flexible, which is incredibly important to me. Obviously, even if I hadn't been forced to make some of the roster decisions, it still probably would have ended up something like this, just because our stage 1 team I think was really flexible and that meta was good for us. But kind of beyond that, the team has gotten less and less flexible, and it kind of just leaves it up to luck. Who knows what the patch is going to be? Who knows what the meta is going to be? And I think this team could handle just about any meta. I think as we're seeing right now too, it's not that flexible, but Brig, Juno comps get pretty weird, and both of our supports being able to play Juno is really, really nice. And I think if we had different decisions go on and they weren't both able to play Juno, it would be a really big problem. So I think it's definitely on the stronger side. I would say top 2 versions probably.
And then has that, obviously, because you've changed so much of a roster, has the cooling structure sort of changed? Sort of as we look at the team now, how's the cooling sort of shared amongst the team?
It definitely has. In the past, it's been a lot of Rocket and Icy did it a lot too. With Riker coming back, he kind of does the same thing he's done. He's always been a really big comm leader and fight planner. But with this version, it's a lot more of Liar. Liar has a lot of experience. He's been through a lot of metas, and so he kind of has like a really good intuitive grasp. Like right away we were going into this meta, and he's making calls basically exactly the way I want him to, where he leads a lot of the neutrals, obviously does the ult tracking, and then Riker does a lot of the fight plans with them together, and then in the past, Rocket has done a lot. In this meta, since he's not in all the time, he kind of doesn't as much, and we kind of just like the DPS are more just like chill kind of carry players, and Squid kind of likes to fill that role as well too.
And then, if I get your take on the meta, then obviously, like you said, I think every region has come to the same consensus that Juno Brig is basically going to be played in 80-90% of situations, and a lot of the risks are coming into it as well. How do you feel about this meta now with Juno being such a big part of it?
Well, definitely Juno has broken a couple of the normal rules of the game. It reminds me a lot of the Mauga meta when Mauga was really, really broken, like early EWC, I think, ish Mauga meta, where having a character that is so strong that the comp is built entirely around this character changes a lot of the macro. Like a lot of the macro is kind of similar to that comp too, where like the ult usage is not really like people think of it as like a rush comp, but it's really not a rush comp in my opinion. Just because in rush there's a lot of ult baiting and layering properly, and in this meta you see a lot of the combos, the Orisa ults, basically anytime the burst of normal Overwatch stops working because Juno just has way too much healing or Mauga E is just way too strong or whatever, things start to get really, really weird. But I think in general, some people think of it as a low skill comp, and I think those people don't really know enough about the comp, and they're just not good at it. But I do think, regardless of it being low skill or high skill or not, it's still, at least in our region for sure. I'm not as sure about EU, and Korea kind of has it figured out now, but definitely in NA, the teams do not know the comp very well yet, including us. We're not above that. And so I think there's lots of potential for upsets in this tournament, especially in the first couple rounds, the first round, the first lower rounds, I think after that, Toronto and NRG will get to play each other. Us and Nightmare will play each other. Some of the teams will hard VOD that and they'll figure it out. Especially Toronto always gets way better, after they lose their first match of the tournament. But I definitely see an upset coming somewhere, and I think towards the finals it'll be a lot more locked in and things will get more predictable.
And would you say this is a meta that suits your team then? You talked a bit at the start about the team's now a bit more flexible or can handle these different comps. Is it a good meta to have it so macro focused?
Yeah, I think it is. Especially for us, Liar is one of the only main supports that can play Brig, which is really nice to have. I watch a lot of the Brig players. It's very, very punishable part of the comp, and I think if you don't have a strong backline, it's really, really dangerous. Not the DPS is not that hard or complicated, between Genji, some of the teams are playing Mei, nothing against those characters, but Cass in this meta, it's really not that hard to just play front to back, shoot the tank, slide Genji angles, whatever. You're getting packs, you're getting mega pocketed. But for the supports, it's really punishing. For the tank, it's really punishing, and so I think our macro is really strong compared to the other teams, and our backline is really strong compared to the other teams. So I think it puts us in a really good spot.
Would you say this type of meta as well is one where you as a coach can maybe have bigger influence than some others as well?
Yeah, it is actually, which is nice too. That and the map picks are very weird too, and I think that's a lot of the area where the coaches will kind of influence the matches, because in Korea they're kind of handshaking on a lot of the map picks as they normally do, and so there's tons of VOD material on a very few select maps. On the Runasapi they play every single match,
Yeah.
But I think over here we have some room for the coaches to figure out some maps that are maybe lesser known, and I think that's a big tool we have, because we have a couple of those that I think people don't have a Korean match to go watch and figure it out, and they're gonna have to do it on their own, and I think that's where the other teams are in deep water.
And then if we talk about the tournament so far, you lost the game in groups up against Citrus Nation. What do you think went wrong in that series for you guys?
Well, in that series, we were still kind of well, first of all, we were still deciding on what comps we want to play, which was making things a little difficult. I think up until that point, our scrims, other teams had not figured out how the meta comp works, and so we were playing other stuff against them. Like we were playing some Queen, we were playing some Zen, and it was working, and it felt really strong. But I think it was just because those teams didn't actually know how to play yet, and so we were just whatever we were trying was working. And then we hadn't really dialed in like on that comp yet and on how to beat that comp. And then with Zeb, and their team I think they're actually really underrated right now too, to be honest. Like I think, I won't say too much, but I think they're in the higher tier teams, especially this specific meta. If teams handshake on this comp, they're going to be very, very good. And so I think they just had like a really good early read on it, and it worked out nicely for them in meta. And I think it was a good time for them to play us for the win.
And then that means when we get into the top 8, you actually find yourself up against Nightmare, which for a lot of people would be obviously a bad matchup to have first, playing one of the top teams. But in many ways, because of how the circuit point system works, for you to qualify, you need to do well individually, but you also kind of need Nightmare to do not very well. So a good way to make them not do very well would be to send them to lower bracket immediately. So it's maybe worked out quite nicely in the end. How confident do you feel going into that matchup?
Well, I think the earlier on in the tournament you can face the top teams, the better it is. Because, like I said earlier, like before that, those Toronto matches happen, before NRG, Nightmare, us matches happen, like there's not too much VOD material, especially on those maps that Korea has not played. So I think right now is the best time for us to catch them. They're still going to be maybe, figuring out, they have so many subs, who they even want to play. I've heard a lot of things about how their scrims are going. I think Z, their sub support, has more points than Admiral. Maybe they're still trying to min-max that, and I think we're very, very confident going into that match that we have a plan to beat them. And the winner of that match has a very, very large advantage for the rest of the tournament. Like you said, like the loser is going to go into losers against NRG very quickly.
Yeah.
Or, maybe if NRG upsets Toronto, you're in lowers against Toronto.
Well,
and
it's
that's
bad
not fun
either way.
at all.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, I think we're very confident that it's a really good shot for us to qualify, and winning that match would put us right where we need to be. So.
And then casting your mind at the whole tournament, because of the stakes in mind, a lot of the time I would ask teams about, obviously winning it would be great, but there's different tiers of success. Because of where we are in this stage of the year, is it really just making Stockholm as success, not making Stockholm as failure at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to think of it that way. Like, we could get second, and if somehow that doesn't qualify us, it still wouldn't feel very good, So I think that is kind of at the end of the day, like that one placement higher than Nightmare and Citrus. But I think realistically, we feel like Nightmare is a top 3 team at least. So in our heads, if you asked me what placement are we aiming for, I would say top 3 or number 2, like, going for that over Nightmare. Because, if Nightmare gets 6th somehow, then, I'm cool with the 4th. But I really don't think that's going to happen. So.
And then, excluding your own team, obviously, because you might be a bit biased, who would you say is the strongest team in the region right now?
That's where I might have some hot takes. I do think, Toronto doesn't scrim NA as much as they scrim EU, so a lot of their strats and how good they are kind of hidden, but I do have an idea of how good they are, and I don't think they are unbeatable at all this tournament. But I still would probably have to put them first, especially because I think even if they do lose a match, they have shown, they lost a match in stage 2 to M80. They lost a match in stage 3 to NRG. I think if they lose a match to anyone, including us, they have the best chance of learning every mistake they made and coming back and putting on a flawless performance. So I would have to put them 1. But I do think outside of them, I think Citrus is the dark horse. I actually think Citrus and Fluffy. I don't think that Fluffy's win against NRG was a fluke, actually. I watched back the matches closely. So I think look for an upset from Citrus or from Fluffy, personally. But
Okay, yeah. No, I think a lot of people have sort of talked about how the idea now in this meta, in some ways, it changes the power level of teams in terms of
Definitely does.
different things are rewarded, and that maybe equalizes the playing field with Toronto because they don't just have certain comps they can rely on, where they just have overwhelming player quality on certain heroes now other teams can't match. So, but the Fluffy Dream or the Fluffy Aimers and the Citrus Nation, I think, yeah, definitely you're on the hotter side there, maybe a bit more on your own, but I can see the vision. So thank you very much, Cap. I appreciate your time. Obviously, best of luck to you and the team for the event and your quest to try and get to Stockholm.
Thank you.